innovation, invigoration, and inspiration. And when we talk about nutrition, we absolutely need innovation in our cereal systems, in our food systems, at policy level, on the plate. And we also need innovation in terms of the production of materials, technologies, products that are meeting people's needs culturally, regionally. We also need innovation in the agricultural system. We need to drive sustainable production. We need to measure this sustainability. We need to demonstrate the credibility of it. And we need to use it to engage others. So engagement is about invigorating others, from governments to private sector, to those involved in scaling. But we must be intentional. We must ensure that our sustainable production system that is being driven by innovation accrues benefits to farmers. We tend to forget that they are net consumers rather than producers, and therefore nutritional gains must meet their needs immediately at the farm level before they start meeting the needs of consumers at large. And when I talk about inspiration, I think we need to use inspired examples and evidence to persuade climate finance to support smallholder agricultural production that is climate smart. And we need to use inspiration, evidence, and creativity to persuade people to change the way they eat and to adopt more nutritious diets.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.
Welcome to the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. This seminar is in English with interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. We invite you to follow us in LinkedIn, YouTube, and social media using the hashtag Women in Science for the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. We will be hearing today from a leader in agricultural research for development, Dr. Yvonne Pinto, Director General of the International Rice Research Institute, IRRI. We invite you to submit your questions and comments on Slido to be addressed in the Q&A session right after the presentation and conversation with our distinguished speaker. Yvonne Pinto will have a conversation with Alison Lane, agroecologist based at CIMMYT, India. Lane is a farming system analyst with over 15 years of experience working in South and Southeast Asia. Her research combines participatory agronomic research, simulation modeling, and smallholder engagement to improve management strategies for sustainable rural households. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Brian Gobards, Director General of CIMMYT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Yvonne Pinto. Dr. Gobards, over to you.
Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Once again, welcome to our Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science webinar. As you well know, now almost more than a year and a half ago, we launched the TED Talk Meets Fireside Chat style series on women leaders because we wanted more women leaders in science institutions like ours. And one of the recommendations received when analyzing why there's not enough women leaders was that we need role models, that we need examples of leadership styles. And we took that recommendation to heart when we started exactly this series to achieve a broader representation and gender balance in our organizations. We need, therefore, to provide more opportunities to hear from women leaders, their life journeys, their lessons, and their insights. In this series, we therefore highlight women leaders of all sorts, in the field, in different disciplines, in their community, at the global stage, in other CG centers. And today, we have a true catalyst of change, a true women leader. Yvonne Pinto is already our 28th Catalyst of Change speaker. That also means 28 leaders from within CIMMYT have interviewed all those fantastic predecessors of this seminar series, and today will not be different with Alison as one of our upcoming stars within the organization. Yvonne Pinto is the Director General of the International Rice Research Institute, or IRRI, one of our sister institutes with a common legacy. Pinto has a long career focused mainly on technology generation, innovation, ecosystems, and international development. She began her early career in agricultural research and academia, followed by 15 years in private philanthropy, creating and implementing investments in agriculture, enterprise, finance, and education, including the establishment of successful institutions, particularly in Africa. Pinto has also worked collaboratively with governments, UN agencies, international NGOs, the private sectors, bilateral and multilateral donors, and independent private foundations. She has worked respectfully to challenge them, to think differently, and to measure and evaluate the effectiveness of their work, always with an emphasis on robust evidence and an openness to a diversity of views. And that's exactly what Yvonne is doing today within the CGIAR system. I have seen her operate and want to express my deep respect for the way she challenges the status quo, always with kindness and always with openness to listen. Her experience is clearly something we should be thankful for, that she's willing to share this with us today, but also that given her experience and a range that ranges from working towards solutions to some of the most intractable disease problems facing African agriculture, to understanding all the way to understanding the successful elements of digital economy and technology ecosystems at policy and practice level globally, is really a capability that is unique and complementary to what CIMIC needs and the CGIAR requires. She has a keen interest in big data and its interface with science and sustainability in the bio-revolution that is upon us. Above all, Yvonne is a true leader and a very esteemed colleague. Yvonne, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Bram, and thank you to CIMIC for your very kind invitation to be part of this series. It really is extremely flattering to be called a woman leader. It's a great privilege, obviously, to be in that position. And I think it's an even greater privilege for people of your authority to be recognizing that. So I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for working with me in this system that is the CGIAR. I deeply appreciate your points of view, and I am inspired by the points that you make, and I'm grateful to have that dialogue. I wanted to start off by using a quote, and I hope the quote will become meaningful for you as I go on. My very favorite quote is an African proverb, and it is, until the lions have their own storytellers, the tales of the hunt will always favor the hunter. And the reason that I like that quote so much is that it illustrates that the diversity of views paints very different pictures. We're living in a very complex world. We're living in a world that is very polarized, and therefore coming from it from a different perspective can be very helpful. I think that we should make space and listen carefully to views from very diverse people. I think women play a very important part in sharing some of those diverse views. In order to share my journey a little bit with you, I wanted to explain my positionality. It's actually played a very big part in my development, and that is that I was born of Indian heritage in East Africa, and I grew up as an African. I was educated in Europe, hence the accent, and therefore I might present as a Brit or even an Indian, but actually my identity is rooted in Africa. And I find myself now in Southeast Asia, based in the Philippines, and I would say that I really feel very much a global citizen, and I found it very easy to relate to very many cultures and very many traditions in different parts of the world. You'll also be surprised to know that I started my career here in the Philippines about 39 years ago. I was leaving school. I had a place at university, and I wanted to experience what I thought was my interest, which was really looking at tissue culture in rice. And I had the privilege of coming to IRRI and starting that investigation into sort of scientific excellence. That journey then took me to university. It took me to studying biotechnology, and I ended up by doing a PhD in molecular virology, applying the principles of cell biology and molecular biology, but trying to create a solution for a practical problem in West Africa for a virus that was attacking rice. So my journey took me all the way to the Philippines to end up by looking at a solution in a different part of the world. I will say that I also had the opportunity to spend some time in ICRISAT in between my university degrees, looking at sort of biotechnology and its approach to introgressing traits like cytoplasmic male sterility into different species of pearl millet. So I found myself growing up in an environment where scientific research was very, very important. It's important also to say that as a child, I grew up on the first of Ethiopia's Institute of Agricultural Research stations, which was called Heleta. And so understanding the practical application of research in order to solve problems was what I found very quickly motivated me. Having then spent a couple of postdocs based in the UK and dealing with looking at tropical diseases in Africa, I ended up by doing some postdoc work in which we were taking plant viral vectors and creating edible vaccines. These were edible vaccines for human viruses and also for animal viruses. And so my development took me into an interdisciplinary area of where the research perspectives could lend themselves to identifying opportunities for human health in the context of immunizations. Some of that work, I'm delighted to say, although it's taken many, many years, finds itself in clinical trials today. So I think that these practical opportunities were the things that inspired me. I actually soon found that publishing in scientific journals was not really the thing that gave me joy. And I wanted to actually be at the interface of people who were working in scientific disciplines and really testing the edges of trying to find solutions that were practical, that farmers and consumers could apply in their everyday lives. Having completed my scientific career, I then went to work for an independent foundation funding scientific work, again, for practical impact. And this was a real delight because people were thinking very differently. I think my most challenging pain points really related to being able to speak in normal terms about complex subjects so that ordinary people could understand the principles behind them. I spent 10 years funding scientific endeavors. A good proportion of those grantees were actually the CGIAR centers in Nigeria, in Uganda, looking at disease prevention and disease solutions, looking at the propagation of crops. And that work then took me to working with another foundation based in the US and into the development of institutions and understanding institutional functionality and its contribution to developing human capital in science, again, for the development of solutions. Having spent about 20 years in the field, I was involved not only in funding the research, but funding the institutional operational models, funding capacity development initiatives, funding the creation of new institutions, and also funding in an interesting space, public-private partnership models. So I'm really interested in the application of science, not simply for one dimension or one industry or one sector, but actually to see if we can identify gains in multiple sectors. Having spent quite a lot of time then funding initiatives, I would always be interested to understand what the results and the impact of those investments were. And that took me into the field of evaluation. I then actually was involved in running my own initiative called Align Impact, in which we were measuring the impact of innovations all the way from seed systems in a farmer's field to things like women's economic empowerment at a national level, and looking at innovation ecosystems and how they worked to actually take up technologies and use them and distribute them and be able to identify the impact created by them. So having spent about 15 years measuring the impact of innovations, I was intrigued to learn more about the digital space and the digital economy, and had a long-term consulting opportunity in an organization, a development finance institution based in the US, that was trying to encourage countries through country loan programs to develop digital economies and to actually ensure that those digital tools would be able to advance production in the agricultural sector, opportunities for farmers to access inputs and information, and to be able to then aggregate produce and be able to sell it through commodity exchanges or marketplaces for reasonable prices, and to then ensure that these farmers were integrated into value chains that were of commercial significance. It was a really interesting experience, and it also led me back into a more scientific arena, where I worked with an AI startup company called Eagle Genomics, applying tools that were digital and software related to understand communities of microbes in the human gut microbiome, microbes in the soil microbiome, and also looking at animal guts. And so I think it's really, really important to retain an open mind about what you can learn where. And most of the elements that I was engaged in brought me into contact with people of very diverse backgrounds that all required a degree of management with an open mind in order to enable them to thrive, but also to recognize what scientific excellence was, to recognize what the quality of good evidence is, and to inspire a learning agenda in any institution, so that that notion of continuous improvement is part and parcel of the fabric of an institution. And so I find myself here as the Director General of the International Rice Research Institute. I'm very fortunate to work with some of the brightest minds in the world in a crop or a cropping system that feeds more than 56% of the world's population, and with the opportunities to use science to solve problems related to climate resilience for a crop that is certainly not going away. It's such a culturally important crop in the region, but also opportunities for improving the nutrition of that crop so that it can create benefits for human health outcomes. So I think that that sort of rounds out my experience. And I think that it has been very difficult for me to see role models that I can relate to that are very much like myself. But I think I've been incredibly important to have very inspiring mentors who have had a tremendous amount of support and belief in me and have created a sense of purpose, which helps you to get up in the morning. It helps you to be inspired about the things that you do. It helps you to look for the best in people and to empower other people to become leaders in their own rights. I think the way that leadership works in the world we live in today is a very different model to the ones that we may have been brought up with. I'm going to stop there for a few minutes. I hope that that helps people to understand a little bit about my story. I am privileged to be able to answer any questions that you may have and to add any details that might be helpful to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I think now we get to the bit where we get to have a chat, which I have been looking forward to very much. So just working out the technology. So thank you for that really interesting introduction. And firstly, congratulations on your appointment as DG at IRRI. It's really inspiring for myself and no doubt for other women to see you take on this role. I'm sure it was an exciting and innovative and different challenge for you. And yeah, congratulations on the last 4 months, and we wish you every success going forwards in that way too.
Thank you.
I'd like to start out. You mentioned that you're an immigrant, and I'm assuming from your bio that you're also the daughter of immigrants. And that's I think a situation that many of us are in as scientists. I think there is a higher degree of diversity in our backgrounds than in many other professions. I don't know if I've just got a different sample set, but I think that's true. And so how has this your exposure to different cultures, and I think also perhaps your exposure to not being in a majority always, in the majority culture always, how has that affected how you work in science and your science leadership roles?
I think that it's a fantastic question, Alison. I'm sure it's a question that a lot of people in my position would have asked themselves. I do think that coming from an immigrant background has been a strength for me, mainly because it creates an adaptiveness, I think. The adaptiveness to actually look and learn, observe what's happening around you, be much more open to understanding how things work. And I would say that there's a wonderful book that I have used probably for the past 20 years in my thinking. It's called The Culture Map, and it tells you about different societies and how they work, and different countries and how decisions are made, and whether or not they have authoritative or consultative leadership styles. And that book explained to me a lot of my observation. So I actually think that I am one of those incredibly fortunate people who feels like they're from everywhere and relates to everyone. My language skills are not as refined as I would like them to be, but I also don't have a huge amount of pride when it comes to trying to speak other languages.
That's
I'm very
important.
keen to
That's very
do
important.
it, and people are very forgiving, and for that I'm supremely grateful.
Absolutely. And can I ask, possibly this isn't a fair question given that you now work for IRRI, but how do you feel about the rice versus wheat debate? You know, I think that's to me, as much as language, the comfort and the ability to eat rice at repetitive meals versus doing that with wheat is a big and possibly corn and maize in Latin America and South America is a big determinant of cultural comfort. How do you feel about rice 3 times a day or wheat 3 times a day?
That's a lovely question, because I grew up in a country where the main meal was made from teff. And so it was neither rice nor wheat. It was grass seed, and you ate it 3 times a day. But what I will say, and it's very apparent in the global south, is that the food we eat is much more culturally ingrained in what we do. And I say that because I recently went to Vietnam. I visited some of our work there, and I understood that you don't say good morning in Vietnamese. You say, have you had your rice today? And so the significance of that, I think, draws a parallel between our relationship with food and the frequency of that food, and in different parts of the world, how often we feel we need to eat that food on a daily basis. So I'm very unjudgmental about what works for different people. But I think that significance is a very personal and a very cultural one.
I 100% agree, yes. And I think it's a big part of being able to feel at home in different cultures is to be able to enjoy the food of different cultures as well. Yeah. I'm interested in your recent work on big data sets, and you talked a little bit at the end of your introduction about big data sets. And I should preface this by saying I work entirely in farms, and I haven't been in laboratory since my very first year of chemistry, where they told me I could pass the course if I didn't ever come back and see them again. So I'm not a lab person. So my idea of big data may be different to your idea of big data, I guess, is how I'm prefacing this question. But what I'm interested in how do we ensure big data are equitable in their collection and in their representation of in the populations they represent and in their analysis. And it occurred to me when you were talking, and I appreciate you were talking about analyzing large data sets of virus populations, but I think there are still analogues into human populations and taking large data sets that involve people more closely. It occurred to me that we've all heard the examples of how smartphone technology, facial recognition and things was trained on the white men who developed it. And so it worked really well for those populations, not so well for the rest of the world. And how do we translate that to big data sets in general and ensuring that they are equitable and fair and really work for the populations in the global south as much as anywhere else in the world?
I think this is such an important point. One of the striking examples for me is that one of the companies I worked for was based in the Sanger Institute, which is a human genome program initiative or an institute really renowned for that. And that institute has recently started to sequence 100,000 genomes, because all of our medical protocols are based on the Caucasian genome. And what we've discovered over time is that the type of therapeutics in the medical field have to be tailored to the genetic interactions of their hosts. Now, in the plant world, we know this. We know that there are external organisms in the soil. They react to stimulus that comes from the plant. A very good example of that are rhizobial bacteria. They respond to root exudates. They transmit themselves towards roots and actually end up by inhabiting roots. And that relationship is a very sensitive and a very intimate relationship. And so I think the notion of, genetics and the environment is something that big data has the opportunity to unravel for us. And the technology that we can use can help us to understand what do we have in the genetic background, and the approach that we can take, which is about predictive network related analytical science, again, data related science, can tell us a little bit about how the environment and what in the environment is interacting with the genetics in our plants. So I think that the premise of big data will start to unlock our understanding of how we drive better health outcomes in humans using medical interventions, and how we drive better opportunities for resilience in plants and indeed their nutritional potential by understanding that in plants. And that's what excites me. I'd like to know more. So if you said to me, what is it that really motivates you? It's the opportunity to learn about these exciting things.
Thank you. That was a really, really interesting answer. And I love the way that you explain how petty racism is and how effective it is using the plant analog. That just doesn't make sense when you consider a broad population and wanting to actually understand what works across different groups within that population. It was really very effective. So thank you.
There's one more thing I'd like to add to that, Alison, which is that increasingly our understanding of the microbes that live in our soils means that there are common families that are acquired through inhalation by humans that live in the human gut, and indeed through grazing by animals that live in the animal gut. And so we're just beginning to understand those common families, their functionality, whether they are beneficial, whether they are creating problems for us, and whether there are solutions in those systems that are natural that we may be able to harness as well. So that's another example of how the interconnectedness of our sectors means that big data is probably one of the only solutions that really helps to understand that complexity of the interconnection.
And it's a really exciting space to be in. The other thing about big data is there's a lot of doom and gloom stories around, but you're showing us that there are solutions that are only possible using the big data tools that we didn't have even 5 years ago, that really have the capacity to open up our horizons. So yeah, that's a fascinating space. Thank you. Yeah. Talking about interconnectedness, I'm very impressed that, or very aware that your background is more outside the CG world than it is inside the CG world. And I think for a lot of our leaders in the CG space, that's a very unusual space to be in. So yeah, it is an impressive to have this outside thinking. So what are your perspectives now that you've been here for a whole 4 months this time around? What are your perspectives on women in particular in the CG? And how have they differed from perhaps before you were quite so intimately engaged with the CG when you were more at the private organisations?
Well, let me say that as a stint in the philanthropic sector, I had the privilege of supporting an initiative which was called Award African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, which originated from a CGIAR gender and diversity drive. And at that time, there was very much a drive to actually enhance opportunities for women for what they called fixing the leaky pipeline, which was that women would disappear from this projection towards seniority and authority. And I think that actually that program has done a lot, but other programs have given women tremendous opportunities in ways that I never imagined would be possible. So I think we definitely have capable women. We have women who are, extremely talented and finding opportunity. I think in the CGIAR, and although Alison, you're right, I've not been in it, I've actually sat in governance roles around it for quite a long time. We've been looking for the metrics that suggest that these women are actually making it to senior leaders in the CGIAR. And I would say that there's still improvement to be seen in that context. But I think it's not just women. I would also like to make a plug for women of color. And that is a very rare proposition. And I've had a very privileged experience because I think I've had a privileged education. I think, people have been welcoming and have opened doors for me. I would love to see that for many, many more women. And if there's ways in which I can help with that, I'm very keen to do so.
And so my next question was going to be, I'd like to change it slightly. It was going to be around, do you see that different generations, there are, the role of being a scientist is different for women now to maybe when you started your career to perhaps even before that? And do you see that emerging women, but perhaps we could frame that as well in terms of women of color, and do you see that the roles for women of color in science are changing over time? And do you have either trajectories of change or recommendations for allies of women of color and for women of color themselves going forwards?
I think I'd like to say a couple of things which are fairly controversial. So in my own career, there were a couple of expressions that I heard related to me, which I found quite disturbing. One was that I once had a boss who introduced me in a meeting as Yvonne Pinto, who is just about to go on her annual spree of maternity leave. And I question whether that would have happened to anybody else. I had another colleague who was a chief scientist, a government chief scientist, who said, "Oh, it's difficult for us sometimes to take advice from a small brown woman, even if it is about development." So what I would say is that there are some things that are uniquely female, and there are some things that are uniquely brown female. I would just never let these things put you off. The most important thing is to understand what is it that drives you, and to do so with as honest a proposition that you bring to the world. And I think it's really about the determination. So I would say that every woman has the capacity to lead in whichever way they can. I think that there's a special opportunity to learn from other women who lead in a different way. And I would like to put this proposition on the table for those of you who would like to lead, who are listening here. You have to be authentic about your leadership in order to really maximize what you can offer. If you emulate a very masculine type of leadership, You may find that very difficult to sustain. And so I always think, find out what your style is, stick to it, stick to your principles and your values, and have the courage to raise your voice and say, have you thought about it this way? Have you thought about it differently? And encourage a conversation that helps you to meet your opponents where they are and bring their thinking a little bit further. And that's the advice I would give. And that's the encouragement I would give to young women who may have been put off by strange remarks, but still have tremendous opportunity and tremendous potential to offer the world.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for sharing those horrific stories, because I think it's important for us to talk about them and acknowledge that these sorts of things are not okay. But also, because we tend to internalize them and not share them, we don't see that, you know, we might think that it's personal rather than it's a generic attack, because usually someone is excelling and threatening by being good, basically. So thank you for sharing and yeah, just your honesty. I guess it's part of that authenticity message that you were also telling us about. Thank you. So taking that one step further, away from when you were in more junior roles, as a female in science leadership, do you think you're judged differently or judged by different standards to male peers? And how do you navigate that space?
I think there are biases in different ways. I won't say that those biases are the same in every context, but I think, you know, you can make a suggestion and somehow that suggestion can be heard better when it comes or as it is delivered by a man. But I think the point is that it doesn't really make a difference if that attribution comes to you or to somebody else. What makes a difference is whether you are working together to advance an opportunity on the basis of that information. And so I think what I would really advocate for is that there's an awful lot that we might take personally that we don't really need to take personally. We need to be able to understand and relate to with empathy the differences that arise in order to just understand them. When we do that, we're in a really good position to find the common ground and to find the way forward. And so I think that is something that we should cultivate in ourselves and we should cultivate in others. There's a lovely expression in English, which is there are 15 ways to skin a cat. There are often 15 ways to solve any problem. It's just a matter of being able to listen to different ideas and reconstruct them towards a solution.
And I guess that comes back to that authenticity message as well, that trying to skin the cat your own way rather than following someone else's path is generally the most effective way to skin the cat. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
The flip side of gender sensitivity is around, well, not the flip side, that's probably the wrong way to put it, but with an increase in gender sensitivity, I think and I think we should do this. We spend a lot of time, as you have mentioned, empowering women, empowering people of colour to take their place in a world where that may not be as easy as for other populations. But I am also conscious that there is a population that has not necessarily grown up with this new dynamic in the front and center in their minds, and it can be threatening for men, particularly white men, to operate in this evolving world. And obviously, the insensitive answer is just to say, well, they should get over it and, you know, take a good hard look in the mirror, go for a run and come into work with a smile on their face, put some lipstick on. But, you know, there are better approaches than that. So how do we acknowledge and continue to empower our male colleagues in an evolved research environment while not going backwards, I guess? So it's around sort of making sure that women's empowerment and empowering people of colour is not seen as a derogatory process, but is seen by all people as a positive step that really enhances our science, our ability to deliver good in the world.
I mean, it's It's a really, really important concept. The world is made up of very different people. And whether we are male or female, whether we are of different shades, whether we are of different religions or, orientations, it takes all of us. And so the lesson 101 of, women's empowerment is to empower men and bring them along and enable them to create the enabling environment for both their performance and that of women. And I firmly believe in that. In fact, most of the evaluation work I've done illustrates the fact that that is a much more successful model for women's empowerment. And at the same time, the benefits that accrue to men are that they are also empowered. But I'll go one step further and I'll say the leadership of today is about empowering others. Leadership is really about enabling others to take their place, not simply about having the spotlight on you. And I mean, I feel slightly flattered by being asked to join you on this panel. I think if I was really a true leader, it would be that other people felt empowered in their capacities because of their interactions with me. And that for me would be success in leadership.
Do you then think that leadership should come with obsolescence? Like, you are, in a way, the skills that you will bring to your leadership positions, you will be aiming to transfer them. And when you've done that, is it time for you to look for new challenges? So you should be almost trying to make yourself obsolete in your current organization so that then you can go and create good somewhere else.
I totally believe in that. I mean, none of us go on forever. Why would you want to persist forever? Once you've been able to impart your wisdom and indeed to learn from other people, you should give others the opportunity to lead. And you may continue to be the leader of your own existence, and that's good enough. But I think that we should enable people who are younger to take on leadership roles so that they have the opportunity to learn from many different people. I firmly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and that analogy is true for a leader as well. It's not one style or one approach that makes a true leader. A real leader is about someone who's versatile in any given situation.
Right. And I
that's
guess humble
really,
enough to.
well, the more authentic you are, the more you understand yourself, the more you're able to convey that. I wanted to just use a quote that Gandhi produced. He said, "As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him." And I think
Yes.
that that's very true.
It's very insightful, yes. Like all Mahatma Gandhi's comments, would make a terrible dinner partner, but a really, really amazing philosopher. Yeah, yeah. So pivoting from inspirational aphorisms, which is hard to do, but do you have tips for effective communication, particularly for women and women in male-dominated fields? So a lot of us are working where we might be the only woman in a team, or so this is not so much around making our voices heard in the physical sense, but in effectively communicating our ideas.
I think there are two things I would say. I think that, again, I would start from an authentic position. You're best off communicating in the style that is most natural to you. But I think that in my case, my approach is very relational. I look for connections in my audience. A male approach might be more transactional, it might be slightly different. You have to understand what is authentic for you to really be able to make that meaningful for you. But I would say that it's simply not about the delivery of the communication as well. It's about the wish to be as effective as possible. So, and this is advice for anybody in general. It's immaterial whether it's a man or a woman. If you want to be good at something, preparation is 9/10 of the law. If you don't prepare, it's very clear that you haven't prepared. And so I think you can do an awful lot more in the natural realm of preparation than it being about, a sort of man or woman type approach to communicating.
Yes, fair enough. Yeah. What would you like to see next? A change for women in science, I guess. What's the thing that within IRRI you'd be working on in broad picture terms to empower women, or within the CG that you'd be championing in terms of empowering women?
Well, I'd like to think, and I'd be interested to know, and I'd be open to the feedback. I'd like to think that women's leadership is different. It's a different kind of leadership. I think it's a much more nurturing, a much more caring approach. I think there's a wonderful place for it in the world. I would say that if we could have a balance between these different approaches, I think that would be the magic that I would look for in the CGIAR more generally. And I would also look for it at IRRI, and I would look for it in our partners, and I would look for it to some extent in the communities in which we serve. And I think that that is the benefit that will really help us. I think in different parts of the world, and again, I would say the Far East is different from the West, the approach to success has been different. Very much in the West, it's about making money and, living in a comfortable way. In the East, it's very much about striving towards building a stronger community. And so I think, it's really important to have clarity on what it is that is meaningful. And I would say having a balance between those, not only the ideas, the views, the approaches, is I think what's going to lead us out of a very polarized world into something that is actually probably a much more holistic and meaningful existence.
And a nicer place to live and work in too, I think.
So. Yeah. I hope so.
If I could give you some immediate feedback, since you asked for feedback, and I will stop hogging you and open you up to other people's questions soon. But I agree with you up to a point. I think I would frame it slightly differently in that I think women's leadership tends to be more emotionally aware, or so perhaps men's is more competitive or driven, but women's leadership tends to have an emotional agility that often isn't seen in women's leadership. And the reason I say that largely, and I absolutely am not saying this to be a sycophant, but I think that it is possible for men to have those qualities as well, those emotionally positive and intuitive leadership qualities. And I do think that we have some of those within CIMIT at the moment too. So I think that in our male leaders, I think it can be something that it's more often in women leadership, but it is possible. And that's a hopeful message, because it means we don't have to just say, oh, we'll have to bring in a woman leader if we want people to be happy, but we'll have to be in a male leader if we want to succeed. We can say people can have emotional agility and, be excellent economic managers, and we can have that in the one person, or we can have different people bringing all that together. But I think there are characteristics that are present in both men and women, but definitely some more prevalent through social conditioning in women. Yeah, and they, as you say, they really build our research teams.
I wouldn't disagree with you at all there, Alison. There's another quote that I'd like to share with you, and it's really a fascinating quote, and it's one that I find very moving. And it's by Viktor Frankl, who is a gentleman who suffered greatly during the Second World War. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he writes a sentence that says, everything can be taken from a man, but one last thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that in itself, I think, is the growth and the freedom that we seek. So you're right, you can develop those characteristics whether you are male or female. And the world is your oyster, so go ahead and give it a go.
Absolutely, yes, with authenticity, which has been a real message that's come through from you tonight, and I think that's a really powerful message. So, thank you very much for taking the time. I've really enjoyed talking with you, but I do think that we need to allow some time for other people's questions to come through too. So I will hand back now. I think I hand you off to our CIMIT support staff, hopefully. I haven't got the run sheet up with me anymore, so
Thank you, Alison.
thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much for this, for having this very rich conversation with Dr. Yvonne Pinto. Now we would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. We invite you to raise your hand, to turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question or comment, or you can submit it via Slido. So we have already, we have already received several questions in the Slido, and I would like to read the first one. It says, in your position as a woman, you can greatly contribute to improving gender equity in agriculture. What actions have you prioritized at IRRI?
So that's a very good question, Isabel. I would say I'm only 4 months into my tenure at IRRI, but I would like to see a 50-50 mix in the leadership team. And I would like to ensure that everything we do has gender integrated into it, so that as we actually deliver technology development or innovation or breeding approaches or agronomy or even our scaling models, we're really intentional about ensuring that we are meeting the needs of both men and women. We are deliberate about identifying those. We are enabling women to engage. We are not excluding them. We are able to measure the impact in their lives and understand both the positive things and the negative things, so that we have opportunities to understand unintended consequences of the work that we do.
Thank you.
I will add more to that as I get further into my tenure, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to give the floor to Janet Lewis. She would like to make a question. Janet?
Yes, thank you very
Excellent.
much, Isabel. Yvonne, thank you so much. It's been delightful to listen to your conversation with Alison. And the question, I have one super quick question. The title of that book that you mentioned about cultures, I didn't quite catch that and I wanted to capture that one. And then I have another question following that.
So the book is called The Culture Map by Erin Mayer. And it's a beautiful book about the difference between transactional and relational societies, the difference between high context and low context societies, and the difference between being able to receive direct feedback or opt for indirect feedback. So when you are presenting evidence, it's really useful to have that context.
Thank you very much. And I see Jenny Nelson put that in the chat, the link to it. The other question that I had is, do you have, one of the things that I think about is that I think women face some different challenges, and especially in leadership roles. Do you have a proactive method for a support system for yourself to help keep you thriving in your roles?
I think it's very important to keep a balance in what you do. I'm a married woman. I have 2 daughters. I have been involved in their education and day-to-day life on a daily basis. They happen to be in their 20s now, so I'm very fortunate that they aren't very little. I've had a very supportive partner, and actually, you know, we've been able to share the chores at home. We've been able to share the upkeep of our children, the responsibilities, and I don't think I would have had the opportunities that I have had if I hadn't had that. I think the other thing is that I've had in the background a mother who was 95 yesterday, and she has been the second mother to my children when I've been on my travel trips all over the world. And I think she has greatly influenced my children as well in a very positive way. So when I use the terminology, it takes a village, it really does take a village, and it has taken a village in my case. So I think when you need to attend to those things, you have to do so intentionally, and you have to apply yourself to your work intentionally too, and not try too hard to get, you know, caught in not doing either of those things well. I hope that's helpful.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Okay, so we have several questions in Slido, and it says here, how does mentorship factor into your view of women's leadership? Have you had the opportunity to mentor young women in science? What have you learned from those experiences?
Let me answer the last question first, because I have had the privilege of mentoring women in science. And it's been my experience that over relatively short periods of time, I ask myself whether I am the one who's mentoring them or they are the ones who are mentoring me, because all women need is a bit of confidence. In fact, I think the thing that holds women back most is the internal voice that says, I'm not good enough. But the reality is you are good enough. And so having somebody to believe in you is probably a catalyst that you need to actually be your best. So my experience has been that all women are capable. All they need is someone else to tell them they have a belief in them. And when I reflect on the earlier question, which is what has mentorship played in relation to myself, is in the absence of finding role models that looked like me or sounded like me or ones that I could relate to, I was really fortunate to find a few that didn't look like me or sound like me, and they had the generosity of spirit to still give me incredibly good advice and to be caring and supportive in that advice. So they're definitely out there. They're from all different types and backgrounds. And it's just a matter of making the first step and saying, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. I like the way that you think, and I like, the responsibilities you exhibit. Would you, from time to time, be willing to give me a little bit of advice? I'm sure that most people would say yes.
Thank you so much. So there are here some comments about, thank you for the message on authenticity. Thank you so much. And also they have already liked the quotes that you have already mentioned. For example, until the lion tells a story, the hunter will always be a hero. They like it very much. So we are about to conclude the seminar. So would you like to share with us some words of wisdom to empower women, not women, but scientists, the young scientists, and the people that is in the system, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Isabel. So here's what my experience has sort of taught me, and it may not work for everybody, but I really think it's worth considering. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're probably going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensure, and only do so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds true for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. You have to listen to yourself and what your conscience commands you to do, and carry on out to the best of your knowledge to do it. And in the long run, I say success will follow you. So that's my advice to young people. Don't try too hard, just be yourself.
Thank you so much. So we would like to thank Dr. Yvonne Pinto for sharing with us your outstanding professional and personal journey in agriculture research for development, being a catalyst of change leader. We are grateful for sharing with us your insightful and inspirational reflections. On behalf of Brian Govers, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank you so much for your valuable time for being here today. And thank you so much for your letting us and sharing with us your personal rich experience and professional growth. Also, we thank the audience that joined today. Do not miss our following Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science series. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And really, I was born at a time when there was a lot of concern around food security. There were a lot of famines, and I remember very clearly as a child, you'd watch that on the TV. And it was really instilled in me from my parents who lived through the Depression with food shortages and rationing, the importance of basically food, and also farmers were actually seen as allies back then. Agriculture was a good thing, and that's really what encouraged me to get into agricultural science from my urban roots. And really the work of Norman Borlaug was what really interested me in the use of genetics to improve the productivity of our food species. That's kind of the background that got me into it. And so I do believe that actually genetics is a really important component of both food security and environmental sustainability. And I would argue that genetic improvement is perhaps one of the most powerful tools we have to drive agricultural sustainability, both plants and animals.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.